Whether it's the bite, the fight, the fish, or the people we chase them with, fishing is an amazing way to connect to what really matters. From the beginner to the experienced angler, there's always more to do, explore, or try in fishing. This is a chance to discuss and celebrate all of it. This is the Love of Fishing podcast. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Love of Fishing podcast. I'm your host, Lyle Gator. For those of you who have not tuned in yet, this is a show dedicated to sharing everything that we love about fishing and having great discussion and conversation with some of the most passionate people who also love fishing. This week, we've got a great guest, and it's Natalie Green from the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. Natalie shares her expertise on ecosystem health and fish contaminant levels in the Niagara River area, as this is where she does all of her work. Like many tuning into the show, I like to keep fish when I'm out fishing, and with my guests, they often want to keep fish. So I thought it'd be cool to talk to Natalie to get her perspective on what's good, what's maybe not so good, and what we can do to make good choices if we're choosing to keep a fish or not. This week's sponsor of the Love of Fishing podcast is Live Target Lures. I'd like to thank Live Target for their continued support of the podcast and other things that I do. They are a great company to deal with, and they make a great product. I think anyone who's fished a Live Target lure can attest to the quality of their products and also the effectiveness. Whether it's early season salmon or largemouth on topwater frogs, I'm always looking for Live Target baits whenever I can. If you're interested in advertising through the Love of Fishing podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out. My email is hookedonniagara@gmail.com. Now, let's get back to the show. I'm excited to introduce this week's Love of Fishing podcast guest, Natalie Green. Natalie is a project manager at the Niagara Remedial Action Plan with the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, and she's graciously agreed to be on the show this week to explain a bit about her work, what it's all about, and also to educate us on issues relating to eating fish from the Niagara area. Welcome, Natalie.
Hi, Lyle. Thank you so much for having me today.
You're welcome. I hope I got all the terminology right.
Yeah, you did. You did
Okay.
really well. There's a lot
Okay.
to keep track of there.
You're working for the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, and specifically your project is the Remedial Action Plan.
That's right. Yeah. So I've been at the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority since 2017. And yeah, I work on a very specific project. Right now, I'm leading the Niagara River Remedial Action Plan. And that is basically, it's kind of two things. It's a plan, a document that we have been put together since the late 1980s, when the Niagara River was first designated as a polluted location in the Great Lakes system. So it's a plan to help us improve and restore the Niagara River, but it is also used to refer to the collaborative group of different organizations that work together towards the same goal of improving and restoring the Niagara River. So while I work at the NPCA, I do work with so many different partners and a lot of different groups and organizations all towards the same goal. So it's one of the reasons I actually really love my job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, being able to work with different people to collaborate on that.
Yeah.
So for my audience, I thought it'd be really cool to have you by because, this is a side of fishing that fishermen and anglers understand, that there's different levels of pollution, that the ecosystem is important, but maybe they don't understand the policy side or the science behind how decisions are made or how we can be best preparing ourselves when we go fishing for what might be good to keep and what might not be. So it's great to have you on the show. And I can't wait to ask some questions about exactly what you're doing. I do start the show with everybody and just do some fun questions just to get to know my guests a little bit. So they're a little bit off the wall and they're not going to be related to your work at all, but
Okay.
just to get to know you a little bit.
Sure.
So my first question is, are you a cat person or a dog person?
I like both. I have owned both. I really love cats.
Okay.
I'm allergic to them though, so that is a funny thing.
I'm a cat guy as well. What's your weirdest food that you've ever eaten?
I have lots of weird foods that I eat, but I like peanut butter with cheese. I think it's really good. If people
Oh,
think that is super weird, try it. It's awesome on toast. Or when I was a
okay.
little kid, I used to get teased for that often. My mom used to make me peanut butter and cheese sandwiches, and yeah, don't knock it till you try it. So weird, but I like it.
Yeah, I will try that. I'm adventurous with the food, and it's funny that you mentioned peanut butter because our family eats peanut butter and pickle sandwiches.
Oh, I've never heard of that before. Maybe
Yeah,
I should give that a try.
sweet pickles though, not dill pickles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
If you had a time machine, would you go back in time or into the future?
Ooh, back in time.
Back in time.
Yeah.
Pre-COVID?
Oh, way pre-COVID. I would actually, as a side note, because I've actually given this some thought, I'd like to be here pre-settlement in the Great Lakes area, pre-settlement, to see what this area looked like
Mm,
before early settlers came and changed the landscape. I would love to see what that looked like and what it was like living in that time.
that would definitely be cool. That would be you. So you're thinking way back. I
Oh
was
yeah,
thinking
way
people
back.
might say, like I want to redo maybe my childhood or my teens or something like that. But yeah, way back in time.
Oh
That's
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I want to go relive. I want to go some, like, not my own life. I want to go back to before me.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Well, we'll jump into some questions now that are more related to your work because I'm very interested to hear from you. How did you become involved in what you're currently working on?
Oh, that's an interesting story. So, well, I grew up in Northern Ontario, and I grew up with a love of nature. I went fishing and camping, and my childhood was spent in climbing trees and, building forts in the forest and that kind of thing. So I got into this career, I think, just because of my love of the environment and of nature. I had originally planned, when I went to do my education, to be a teacher. And this is what I wanted to do. I finished my education and I decided that I loved science even more than teaching, and that there would be a way somehow to meld the two together. So I got a master's degree in biology, studying the effects of fish, the contaminants on fish behavior.
Hmm.
And anyways, long story short, I ended up landing a job with the Essex Region Conservation Authority back in 2008 as their remedial action plan coordinator. And it just fit my skill set. It was that mix of being able to use my education and my science background and my fish background and my toxicology stuff, but also being able to work with other people and do that education component was how I just sort of fell into it with luck, I suppose. But it melds everything that I've always done in my education and my career. So that's how I brought myself to now Niagara, was
Hmm.
was because I did this work in another location, actually. So I've been doing it for some years.
So at your previous location, were you also working on a remedial action plan, or is that new to your situation in Niagara?
No, I was working on that in my other location as well. So I used to live in Windsor, Ontario, and I was working on the Detroit River Remedial Action Plan. The Detroit River being another binational area of concern. That's the terminology that we use. So it's one of these degraded Great Lakes locations,
Hmm.
and similar structure, similar plan. And yeah, that's where I started, was in the Detroit River.
Very cool. From a fisheries perspective, I know a lot of guys that fish the Detroit River use similar techniques to the Niagara, and they're interesting water bodies because they're connecting two, pretty good sized lakes, together, right? If someone isn't familiar with the terminology, can you just explain exactly what a RAP is?
Sure, yeah, yeah. And I kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier, but aRAP, Remedial Action Plan, is a terminology that the government issued for this Great Lakes program called the Canada-US Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement. In that agreement came the recommendation to create remedial action plans for particular locations in the Great Lakes. And there were 42 originally identified. One was added later on, so 43 areas of concern in the Great Lakes. So the Niagara River is not unique to this program, but it was after a lot of pollution issues were coming to light in the 1980s. So the remedial action plan is, like I said earlier, both used terminology to explain the collaborative effort towards improving the ecosystem at these particular locations, but also the actual document. So it's a plan, it's a way to look at issues in the environment
Hmm.
using set guidelines by the Canada and the US Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement gives us indicators that we need to use to measure our progress. And then we try to address those using the collaborative effort, because it's no one organization's responsibility to protect the environment. It's all of our jobs in different ways. And so the remedial action plan and why it's so unique and special is it was one of the first of its kind to bring all of these different organizations and partners together towards one common goal. And that's what is really successful about it as well. It's not just one group trying to push things forward. It's you know, leveraging the responsibilities of other organizations and what they can do within their scope to move progress forward and to try to improve water quality specifically
Hmm.
and ecosystem health in the Niagara River and these other locations.
Wow, that is incredible. I know anyone who's worked on a project before, even just in school, can tell you how hard it can be to sometimes work as a team. So for your
Yeah.
work to be involving, like you said, binationally and all these different groups, it's really special.
Yeah, and it's like I said earlier, it's one of my favorite things about this job. I really love being collaborative, and it is extremely challenging, but that's also something that I like, I guess.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So in the Niagara area, what are some concerns about maybe pollution? I'm assuming chemical pollution is the main thing that you're looking at. And what are those cause for concern when we come to eating fish?
Yeah, okay. So first, I just wanted to mention that the Niagara River is not the only water body that has contamination in it. All of the lakes and rivers in Ontario have some level of contaminants. Even the most remote lakes, really far away from people, would have some level of contamination because some of these pollutants that we're talking about, like mercury, for example, they're naturally occurring. They happen in the environment. They're there. They come from the rock. They come from the atmosphere. They can, drop from the air into these lakes and water bodies. So it's not unique to this area to
Hmm.
have some of these pollutants in the water. But the concern specifically for the Niagara River, because that is what I know the most, is PCBs. So these are polychlorinated biphenyls. These are chemicals that were banned in the 70s. They were used as industrial coolants and for industrial processes. They were banned because they were found to be highly toxic to plants and animals and birds in the environment, and they persist in the environment. It means they stay in water and in sediment for a really long time. So even though they've been banned, um, they are still in some industrial processes. The government is trying to phase these out as
Hmm.
these processes get replaced. But sometimes they're still in sediments, and that's the issue for the Niagara. So PCBs are the main contaminant source that are in fish. How they get there is through these historic sources. So they were used a long time ago by industries. That industry may have shut down. They would accumulate, say, in the sediments, and then you get organisms that live in those sediments, and then small fish eat those, and then bigger fish than those eat
Hmm.
those small fish, and then it moves up the food chain. So you get these pollutants in the water that we're not producing anymore, but they've been there for so long and they're moving up the food chain. And then we, as a top predator, are eating those fish, and they can have some impacts on us as well. The other contaminant of concern in the Great Lakes Basin as a whole, and even in Ontario, is mercury. Mercury can come from industrial sources, but also natural sources. So they're a
Hmm.
little bit more difficult to, implement some sort of remediation for because they're everywhere.
Yeah.
And then specifically for the Niagara River, another chemical that used to be produced in Niagara is called Mirex, and it was on the US side. So any fish in the Great Lakes Basin with Mirex is likely from a historic Niagara River source. With that being said, Mirex was also banned in the 1970s.
Yeah.
Um, we've seen a 90% reduction of Myrex in the Great
Wow.
Lakes Basin since 1970 to 2010. There were some studies published on it. So lots of great improvements. So I don't want to scare everybody about the contaminants in the water. They are there, but tremendous improvements over time because of regulations and because of some of the projects that we're working on.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Those chemicals you'd mentioned comparing 1970 to now. What is sort of the process or what's, I guess, the emphasis in being able to track that with your project?
For us specifically, so we rely very heavily on the scientists that actually do that work. So we go to the literature and use science to guide our decisions and to guide any of the actions that we do. So the beautiful thing about the remedial action plan is that it can, we with that collaborative, we're working with scientists who are experts in this field. So the province of Ontario is actually their responsibility to monitor these contaminants in lakes and rivers in Ontario and report on them. They have a fish contaminants monitoring program, and they often publish their results and report on them, and they create the Guide to Eating Ontario Fish. So we use that information to guide what we're doing. So one of the indicators for the remedial action plan and to understand how the Niagara River is doing, one of them given to us is related to fish consumption. So
Hmm.
the idea is that, if we can use water in beneficial ways, if we get enjoyment from water, then we need to be protecting and restoring that ability to use water. And one of them is being able to fish and eat fish from our water bodies. So eating fish is one of those things that we're interested in because we want to make sure that if there are environmental problems from the Niagara River, that we're addressing them and that we understand what people are eating, what kinds of fish, how often they're eating those fish, so that we can understand if there's any human health impact. So that's how the program is kind of set up to look at the ways in which humans can benefit recreationally,
Hmm.
human health, the environment. So there are different indicators related to those different things. So that's where fish consumption fits in there.
That's awesome. You've actually answered my next question, which
Oh,
was how can people that are maybe looking to keep a fish if they go fishing, how can they find out about how many they should be eating? And you mentioned the Ontario Fish Consumption Guide. Is
mhm.
that available online?
Yes, yeah. So that guide is only online now. It used to be published in print, and I've heard a lot of anglers that we've talked to recently complain that they wish it was in print.
Yeah.
So we've done a couple of solutions to try to address that. But yes, the Guide to Eating Ontario Fish, very important. I recommend that if anybody is fishing from any lake in Ontario, or stream in Ontario, that they go online. It's ontario.ca/fish guide, and you just basically type in the lake or the water body that you're fishing on, and it gives you a table and it tells you which fish are safe to eat, which size, so that when you're catching a fish, say you've got a perch and it's, I don't know, 10 centimeters, you can go look at the table and see, okay, how many meals per month can I eat of that fish?
Hmm.
Generally, the literature tells you 8 meals per month is safe, 8 or more is safe. So the guide is a great way to go have a look, and it provides lots of information about how to clean your fish a particular way to remove more contaminants. It will tell you, how to cook your fish so that you're removing those contaminants. But what we've been doing surveys, in person and online fish consumption surveys
Hmm.
over the last year and a half or so. And we've been talking to anglers and trying to figure out the best way to share that information with them. And something that we heard from anglers was that they thought the guide was complicated and sometimes hard to understand. And we decided to use that information and try to just make it a little bit more easy to understand, to consume, so to speak.
Yep.
So we use, color coding. We have a booklet on our website. We also have a print copy. So if anybody wants it, it's only for the Niagara River, though,
Yep.
not for all of the lakes. But what we did is we took all of the information from the Guide to Eating Ontario Fish, and then we just repackaged it so that it was easier to understand. Somebody could have a look, see what the fish looks like,
Hmm.
whether or not they're catching it from the upper or lower Niagara River, and then it's green if it's safe to eat. It's yellow for a particular size if it's caution, and then red if the recommendation is not to eat, so that it's a little bit easier to understand what those recommendations are. So if people are going to catch fish and eat them, then they can check the Guide to Eating Ontario Fish. Or if they eat Niagara River fish, they can go to our website, niagariver.ca, and they can go find all the Eat Safe Fish materials there as well.
That's fantastic. You've made it very straightforward and easy for people to access that knowledge, which, like you said, sometimes, depending on people's age, may be a challenge for them. So that's great.
That's right. Yeah.
I think something that you brought up that I think is really cool is talking about the different factors that may impact how safe it is to eat a fish. And you talked about fish size. So just for someone who's maybe starting out with fishing in general, what can you say about fish size?
Okay, so generally, the bigger the fish, the more contaminants it will have. So the more pollution it may have in it. The fish itself may not look any different. You wouldn't even be able to tell from looking at it. So that's why it's important to know these things. Generally, the smaller fish, because they're lower on the food chain, they generally are safer to eat and have fewer contaminants. So size does matter when we're talking about fish.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing with size, it's kind of related as well, is sometimes the bigger fish are also fattier fish. So something like a salmon or a trout is big and it's also quite fatty. Certain chemicals stay in fatty tissue more than other tissues.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, like a salmon or a rainbow trout could have more PCBs. PCBs are one of those chemicals that accumulate in that fat. So those fish would, generally speaking, could have more contaminants in them. And some of that fat is between the muscle tissue, right? So when you're cutting a fillet off and you see some of that fat in the tissue, you're not going to be able to cut all of that skin and fat off. Some of it's in your fish. So if you are eating something like a bigger fish, like a trout, lots of people love eating trout from the Niagara River and salmon, then you can cook it on a grill so that fat drips down and doesn't stay in the
Ah,
meat. So it's reducing your consumption of some of those chemicals. So there's really great ways. I don't want to discourage people from eating fish. I think it's and I love eating fish.
yeah.
It's a great way to get some good nutrition. Lots of different fish are safe to eat from the Niagara River, but it's just understanding how to make those choices and the best way to remove those contaminants to reduce your risk of having any types of impacts on your health.
Mm-hmm. So you talk about the impacts on health. What are generally the concerns? Why are we making these choices for our health?
Well, they can impact different parts. There's a lot of science into it, and I'm not an expert in human health, but I know that
Mm-hmm.
it can impact your body and other things in your health. So, for example, if you're a woman of childbearing age or who is pregnant,
Mm-hmm.
those contaminants could get into your baby and could cause some health effects. I don't know specifically. I don't want to say deformities. Is not. We won't go that far,
Yep.
but it can impact just your general health and lead to other secondary health issues and concerns. And it depends on the contaminant, and it would have to be a lot. So if you're eating a fish once a month, the chances are you're not going to have any type of health impacts from that.
Right.
And that's the beautiful thing about the Guide to Eating Ontario Fish. It's rooted in science. It's rooted in Health Canada's guidelines for a total daily impact. And they've looked at how much contamination would impact a human. And so when you look at those guidelines given by the province of Ontario, those are appropriate and are meant to protect people, and they're meant to be very quite strict. So for example, women of childbearing age, the advice given in the guide for that population of people will be more strict than say a man who is age 50.
Mm-hmm.
They'll be recommended to eat fewer fish just to protect them a little bit more.
I love what your program does because you're not saying nobody should be eating fish, right? It's about
Mhm.
science. It's about enjoying the resource and being smart.
That's right. Yeah. And I mean, that's what water, as I mentioned, provides us with these recreational uses, as long as we're smart about it and we're making the right choices and protecting what we do have, then I think that's what really it comes down to, is enjoying what you have and understanding that you have a role to play in protecting yourself as well as protecting the environment.
Absolutely. I know that you guys have become more active on social media, and I hope that from my perspective, being a guide and introducing new people to fishing, that is part of their angler education as
Mhm.
they start to explore these things, that being mindful of that aspect of the fishery is something that they're encouraged to do. So if someone's interested in finding out more about your work, how can they reach you or someone from the aRAP?
So going to our website is a great start, niagarariver.ca. And to reach me, it's ngreen@npca.ca. And then, of course, we're on social media. So you can find us on Twitter, on Facebook, and on Instagram. I believe our handle is Niagara River Wrap to make it quite easy.
Yep. You can use the hashtag too, right?
Yeah, the hashtag Niagara River. We often use that one because it's the easiest and lots of people use it. And yeah, it's a great way to go find others as well. I use it to go follow other fishers and seeing other fish on the Niagara. Some
Yeah.
great pictures out there.
Yeah, we're a proud bunch when it comes to sharing our fish pictures, that's for
Yeah.
sure.
It's great. It makes the Instagram feed really nice to scroll through. I love it.
Yeah. Natalie, I'd like to thank you very much for joining the show this week. It's been great to talk to you and find more out about your projects. It's been great.
Thank you so much for having me, Lyle. It's been fantastic, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
I'd like to thank Natalie for taking time out of her busy schedule to be on the Love of Fishing podcast. It was great to hear from her, and I learned a lot about the Remedial Action Plan, but also just in general about keeping fish in the Niagara area. It was great to hear her perspective as someone who encourages the enjoyment of the outdoors, as well as being careful and smart about how we enjoy it. I think it's worth mentioning that for us who love the outdoors, love fishing, and spend a lot of time near the water, it's our responsibility to take care of the ecosystem, whether that's releasing a trophy fish or being aware of which fish from which water bodies are the best for our own health. I think that's really important, and Natalie has a great perspective on that. Now it's the time of the show where we'll go through this week's poll. Every week I put up an Instagram poll and ask fishing related questions just for the halibut. And this week I asked, what is your favorite fish to eat? So this question was inspired by our guest, Natalie Green, and around the topic of eating fish and what fish people prefer to eat. So the results were 72 for walleye, which was the winner. In second was perch with 46. And behind that, I had salmon and trout, which took an early lead in the poll, but finished with 14 votes. And please, by all means, if you see these polls up on my Instagram, feel free to DM me or fill it out. I like to hear where everyone's at and how people feel about different things in fishing. Now it's the time of the show where we do our giveaway. Every week we're doing a giveaway on the show, and you could win it by subscribing to the channel and also by dropping a comment. You have to do both of these things in order to qualify for this week's giveaway. This week's giveaway is brought to you by Live Target Lures. As we wrap up this week's episode, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. To see the growth of the podcast the last few weeks has been incredible, and I'd like to thank you for being part of it. As you know, I like to end every episode off with something positive. This week, it's kind of a fun quote, and it's a Mark Twain quote that I really, really like. Mark Twain said, "It's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to open one's mouth and remove all doubt." Guys, have a great week ahead. Hook sets are free. Get outside and go fishing. Peace.